Hi everyone! Okay, so this video, I hope that worked. This video is going to be a bit different than my normal recap and ranking videos. I actually wanted to try this, and also I am in final season. It definitely is a season, it's not just a week. And I'm also a theater major, which means that when it comes to my finals, I'm either performing or I am presenting something related to theater. And so today I thought I would actually run you through my research project. It's a lot more interesting than it kind of sounds, because today I'm going to be talking about the fact that Get Out by Jordan Peele is the plot of Shakespeare's Othello. If you haven't seen either of these performances, I will be giving a brief synopsis and going into detail on both of these, so you do not have to worry about that. But yeah. But if you have seen Get Out or you have seen Othello, I would recommend skipping my synopses, I guess is how you would say it, plural. I think when I get into the meaty part of talking about the plots, it can get repetitive after watching the synopses, but I left them in just in case there are people who haven't seen either works and need that extra information. But if you don't need it, I have timestamps to skip to. One skipping the Get Out synopsis, one skipping the Othello synopsis, or the timestamp skipping both of them and just getting into talking about the plots and the plot elements of both the stories. I just, this one was kind of just sitting right here, so I thought, try it. Maybe you guys are interested in seeing it. Maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of try something new. If you see me looking down, I am looking down at my presentation slides and my essay as for reference. But yeah, I'm going to set a timer for your sake and for mine, because I can ramble. Now, of course, with this video being different, there aren't necessarily any rules and parameters, but what I will say is that I will not be covering every detail or aspect of either of these stories. Yes, I am going to give you a brief synopsis, but a synopsis doesn't cover every detail. And what I'm going to be telling you, the proof that I'm going to be giving you, isn't even all the proof that I can show you. It's just going to be a few examples, because if I were to go through every single element that made these two stories alike, we would probably be here for a good 3 hours. So I'm just going to be giving you a few examples that kind of highlight how similar these two stories are. I'm also going to be highlighting the fact that there are obviously differences between these stories. And for me, the one I highlighted in my work is the fact that in the final act, there is a switch up in the characters, and there is also a difference in how both the stories end. And I will be touching on here more than I did in my presentation as to why I believe that is. But yeah, if you think of a similarity that I don't name, feel free to put it down in the comment section, because like I said, there are so many and I know I do not cover all of them. Apologies for this clip looking different and me not having my mic anymore and the audio being slightly different, but I just wanted to put a trigger warning that I am going to be talking about things like spousal abuse, violence, slavery, different things like that. So if you just don't want to hear that, feel free to click off this video. I completely understand. But yeah, I just thought I should put this trigger warning. I should also say spoiler warning for both of these shows. So yeah, back to Jade. Let's get into it. So first off, starting with a brief synopsis of Get Out. If you've never seen Get Out, it is a horror thriller movie by director Jordan Peele. The movie stars Daniel Kaluuya as the main character. His name is Chris Washington, and basically the story is about a man, again named Chris Washington, going to visit his girlfriend's parents' house for a weekend getaway. His girlfriend's name is Rose Armitage, and as they get to Rose's family's home, different things start to occur for Chris. And the first thing, well, not one of the first things, but one of the details that end up occurring is his weird interactions that he has with Rose's, I would say, help around the house. They are black people, and Rose does end up making a statement like, I understand how it looks, a white family with black servants. That's not how it is at all. My grandparents, when they were alive, had brought them around, and we just couldn't bear to let them go after they passed. But these black people do not act like black people, and I will get further into that as to why that is later. But other weird occurrences that happen, Chris ends up getting hypnotized by Rose's mother, non-consensually, I should say. The only reason he knows that he was hypnotized is because he was a smoker, and the next morning he wakes up and the thought of even smoking a cigarette kind of just disgusts him, and he doesn't know it, but he actually gets put in the sunken place through this, and I'll be getting more into the sunken place and what the sunken place is later. But there's also a party that ends up happening, and at this party, Chris faces a lot of microaggressions from the guests at the party as well. What ends up happening is Chris gets sold to the highest bidder. Basically, Chris was brought there by Rose, who has had many victims, all of them, as far as we know, being black. But before Chris is able to be lobotomized by the Armitage family, he is able to basically X majority of the family and escape. And throughout this journey, he is able to find out that all the black people that he comes into contact with at the Armitage family estate, which is only 3 of them, have all been black people who were stolen or brought to the family home by Rose and were lobotomized, and half of their brain was literally replaced with a white person's brain who had, basically bought them so that they could be in their bodies. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of weird, and I will be explaining different things a bit more later, but that is just kind of like a brief synopsis as to what happens in Chris's story. Now moving on to Othello by Shakespeare. This play has definitely been around longer than everyone on this earth, honestly. Basically what happens in Othello is a man named Othello ends up marrying this woman named Desdemona. She is a wealthy woman from Venice. I was about to say Venetian. It's called Venice. And basically Othello is a high-ranking commander, and he gets sent to this island with all his soldiers, and Desdemona ends up coming with him. They get married right before they get there, and throughout Othello's story, his friend Iago convinces him that his wife Desdemona is cheating on him, and he ends up proving to Othello in multiple different ways that this is in fact true, because Othello doesn't necessarily want to believe it. Spoiler alert, Desdemona was never cheating on him. But Iago proves this to him by showing him the fact that she's given the handkerchief that Othello has given her away. She is being secretive. She's meeting up with one of Othello's soldiers named Cassio. And by the end of the story, Othello does end up Xing Desdemona, and right after Xing her, finds out that it wasn't Desdemona who was cheating on him or lying to him. It was in fact Iago who had set this up simply because he did not believe that Othello deserved to be in the position he was in. He didn't like Othello by any means whatsoever. And at the end of the play, like I said, Desdemona gets X'd. Desdemona's nurse gets X'd. I'll put her name on screen right now because I can't remember it off the top of my head. Desdemona's nurse gets X'd by her husband, Iago, I should say. And Iago gets jailed for basically causing the death of so many people. Now I'm going to get into the highlight of my essay, all my details. So Get Out by Jordan Peele is the plot of Shakespeare's Othello. And the main ways that we see the plot of Othello play out through Get Out is through the characters, different elements within the storyline that I will get deeper into. And again, where the stories divulge is in the final act is what I will call it. Getting into, well, highlighting the characters. What I mean by the characters, I mean that we have different characters throughout the story mirroring each other. And the first major mirroring I will highlight is Chris mirroring Othello. And the way that these two are mirroring each other in their respected stories is the fact that they are both black men having to face the different things that come with being a black man in their time, right? Chris is a black man having to experience 2017 America for black people. He's also has to face, like I said, microaggressions from the party guests. One of them says, I would have voted for Obama a third time. Another one tries to measure him up to see if he's athletic and to see if he can golf, when in fact Chris is a artist. He is a photographer. He makes no reference to sports or anything like that. People just keep bringing different things like that up to him. For Othello actually arrived in Venice as a slave, and so he is facing all the things with that. But the thing about it is that their identities as black man guides, I guess is the best one I can come up with, guides their decisions and how they perceive everything happening to them in their stories. Obviously, any person in this world, how we were raised, what we have gone through informs how we react, how we decide to do things, all of it. And so that those are things that are weighing heavy on both of their stories. Next, going into the fact that they are both in interracial, what is that? Interracial relationships with white women, which actually is, I was not going to say that's a bad thing, so don't twist my words. I'm saying it plays an important part in their stories, especially for Othello's case. Him being, yes, a commander, but a black man with a white woman is more unheard of at his time period. And I think this also causes him to like truly question himself. Again, he is also an older man, so he throughout his story is a bit insecure about the fact that he is an older black man with a younger wealthy white woman. But going back, Rose is just a wealthy white woman from New York, and Desdemona is a high class noble woman of her time in Venice. And both these women act as supportive partners throughout the play. I would definitely say that Desdemona is more genuine in her support than Rose is, because Rose, if you remember what I said, basically was dating Chris to lure him to her family's home. So after watching the film and going through the film, you can definitely argue that every time that Rose is being supportive to Chris, she's in fact gaslighting him. You know, Chris will bring up valid concerns to her about the fact that, oh, this is happening and this is happening, and she's like, they don't mean it like that. They don't know any better. Different things like that. When in fact, Chris has every right to raise alarms for the different things happening to him or the different things that he sees. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned this. When I was mentioning Rose and Desdemona, I mean that they are mirroring each other. And next, going to Rod Williams and Iago. Rod Williams is Chris's friend. He is also a TSA agent, and throughout the entire storyline, him and Chris basically talk on the phone. Iago is Othello's friend and also one of his soldiers that follows him. He is called Honest Iago all throughout the play, and Othello trusts this man with his life, which you could argue is one of the downfalls of Othello. I mean, trusting his friend more than his wife. But talking about them both in general, Rod and Iago mirror each other, again being Chris and Othello's friends. They also act as their confidants. Chris oftentimes not only confides in Rose, but he also confides in Rod with the different things that are happening throughout his story. And Rod is the one who's telling him, I don't think you should have gone up there. These people are weird, Chris. He's kind of, while Rose is gaslighting him, Rod is affirming everything that he is feeling. Versus Iago, he is someone that Othello confides in, and you could definitely argue that Iago is the one who ends up gaslighting Othello, because Othello didn't feel anything to be wrong with how Desdemona was carrying herself. Iago was the first one to kind of bring up the fact that maybe you should check on Desdemona. I think there might be something fishy going on there. I think she might be cheating, which again, not true. Rod and Iago also are what causes both our characters to kind of split their stories in the final act, which I will be getting into a little bit later. Next, we'll be talking about the mirroring that happens between the Armitage family / the partygoers and the council members in Othello versus the soldiers. Now, in both cases, these two character groups are two-faced, I would say, to Chris and Othello. They are very friendly to their faces, but most of the time they have ulterior motives. In Chris's case, these people have ulterior motives because they're friendly to Chris's face, but what they are doing is sizing Chris up to literally buy him. There's a silent auction that happens towards the end of the party once Rose takes Chris away from the main party area to talk to him, and they have a silent auction, and Chris is sold off to the highest bidder. Going into the council members and the soldiers, the way that they are two-faced, first of all, again, they follow Othello and respect him because they have to. He is a high-ranking commander, but not all of them necessarily believe that he deserves his position of power, especially Iago. And the council members, they respect him again because he is a commander and he has achieved all these things, but not all of them respect him as a person because of who he is. Now getting into the different elements within the storyline, again, there are so many, and I'm not going to be highlighting all of them in this video, but I will be highlighting some of them, the ones that I thought were not even necessarily the most interesting, but that caught my eye. And the first one being the foreshadowing that happens in both the beginning of Othello and Get Out. Starting with Chris's foreshadowing, basically, as they are driving up to the Armitage family home, Rose is driving, by the way, they end up hitting a deer and Xing it. And when they get to the Armitage family home and they're explaining this to Rose's dad, he basically ends up saying, in a slur of other things, he says, "One less buck." The reason that this is foreshadowing is because buck was a term used during slavery. Buck was a term used to describe young black men. And so the foreshadowing within this is Rose's dad saying one less buck is foreshadowing that Rose has brought one more black man to the Armitage family home, taken him out from the world to come here and be lobotomized by the family. For Othello, his foreshadowing also comes from the father of his lover, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, is Barbantio, I believe. I'm sorry, I took Spanish, not Italian. But basically, after Barbantio blesses their marriage because he has to, he basically says to Othello, then this is Shakespearean, and I quote, "She has deceived me, her father, and may thee." Basically saying, she has lied to me, her father, so what makes you think she's not going to lie to you? This is foreshadowing and also the first seed of doubt that is placed in Othello's mind. And it is foreshadowing because it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because this seed was planted in Othello's mind, now everything that's happening around him, not only being fueled by Iago, but by his own insecurity, everything Desdemona does is proof that she is deceiving him, when in fact it's not. It's just simply Othello, and again, guided by Iago, seeing these different things that aren't necessarily true. The second thing is back to Rod and Iago. Remember, throughout both stories, they act as the informants, and honestly, they move the plot along, especially in the final act. The final piece of advice or information that Iago and Rod both give Othello and Chris really fuels where their stories go next. And first, starting with Chris, he ends up running into a black man named Logan at the party that was happening at the Armitage family home, and Chris's interactions with Logan are very weird. For him being a young black man, it is not a normal interaction he would have with other black men. And so what ends up happening is Chris snaps a picture of Logan, which if you've seen the film, that puts Logan in a state where, we don't know it at the time, but the actual man who has been bought by the man named Logan gets to come forward and be like, "Get out, you need to get out of here." This just scares Chris because he doesn't understand what was happening at the time. But what I will say is that after taking the picture, Chris actually ends up sending the picture to Rod because he's like, "I think I somehow recognize this man." And Rod is able to confirm to Chris that you do recognize that man because he is from where we are from, and he is not in fact a man named Logan. He is a man named Andre Hayworth who has been missing for months now. That piece of information lets Chris know that he has a right to be feeling what he has been feeling all throughout the story, and that there is more nefarious things happening here. And that also leads him to going to search Rose's room and finding pictures of other people, other black people, black men and women Rose has been with. Mind you, Rose told Chris that he was the first black man she'd ever been with. So finding these photos not only confirmed to him that she was lying, it also confirmed to him that the people, that being the servants that were around the home, the black men and women, were people she had dated, and now they're on the property acting as servants and not interacting with you like that. More things that let Chris know that he needs to get out. For Othello, the last information that Iago is able to give him is in the form of a confession from Cassio. At this point, Othello has been given a bunch of information by Iago to prove to him that Desdemona has been cheating. Again, the handkerchief along with other interactions he has seen. And Othello tells Iago, "I need concrete proof from you that my wife is cheating on me. Otherwise, I'm going to beat you up." Obviously, he says this in like a Shakespearean English, but that's basically what he says to this man. And so Iago's like, okay. And he is able to get a confession from Cassio that he has been sleeping with Othello's wife. But the reason that I put this in air quotes is that Cassio was not confessing to Iago that he had been sleeping with Desdemona. He was in fact confessing to Iago that this is the woman that he'd actually been speaking to and talking to and having fun with. Cassio was like, "It's going well, I don't know like about the future, but I'm enjoying myself right now." And so that's what Cassio was talking about. He's not sleeping with Desdemona. He's actually, I would argue, one of the only soldiers that respects Othello for who he is and his rank and position. But from Othello's point of view, listening in on this conversation, it only sounds to him like Cassio is confessing to sleeping with Desdemona. And so again, this final information leads Othello to make the decision that he he makes later on in the story that I will get back to. The next element that I will highlight, the last one I will highlight for time's sake, is the fact that both Chris and Othello experience out-of-body things. For Chris, again, is the sunken place, and I will read this quote here that says, "Whereby the host is aware of the presence of another form and unable to do anything about it." Or how I would personally say it in my words is a sunken place is a hypnotic state that the Armitage family victims are put in, where they are hypnotized to only hold a small space within their minds. They cannot control their bodies, they cannot control their mouth, they cannot control anything. They can only watch and hear what's happening. And for Othello, he goes into trances when met with, I guess, mind-boggling, earth-shattering information. Like the last trance he goes into is after Cassio's confession, and I will read a little bit of the Shakespeare for you here. And I quote, he says, "Pish, noises, ears, and lips, it's possible," I don't know how to pronounce that, "confess, handkerchief, oh devil," and then he falls into a trance where you cannot reach him for a short period of time. And that one to me, when comparing these two stories, was the most interesting because like they both go into these like out of body experiences for different reasons, obviously, but it happens to both of them within the plots of their stories. I just think that's very cool. I mean, the reasons as to why it's happening is not cool, but the fact that both of them. Now we're going to what I would consider the role reversal in the final act. If you remember, the last piece of information that Iago and Rod give Chris and Othello leads into the final act of the story and leads them to make the decisions that they're making. And for the majority of the story, Chris is mirroring Othello and Desdemona is mirroring Rose. But in the final act, after both finding out their pieces of information, Chris ends up mirroring Desdemona and Othello ends up mirroring Rose. And the reason this is because how I describe it in my presentation, to summarize it, I said Chris and Desdemona become the hunted and Othello and Rose become the hunters, but I'll break it down further here because I actually have time to. I'll start with Othello. Othello, after finding out Cassio's confession, basically says that, I have to ex Desdemona. She's lied, she's cheated, and I do not want any other man to suffer the same heartache and fate that I have dealing with this woman. And for Rose, at this point, she is a player in leading Chris to, I would say, a fate worse than death. And going through Chris, at this point, finding out all this information, he knows he needs to escape if he wants to live. And for Desdemona, she, at this point in her story, has just been like, what am I doing wrong? Why is my husband so angry at me? What is happening here? And so again, they both Chris and Desdemona become the hunted, and Othello and Rose become the hunters. And what divulges in this final act with Chris and Desdemona being the hunted and Othello and Rose being the hunters is where Get Out has a happy ending and Othello has a sad ending. Starting with Get Out, in the final act of the story, obviously Chris realizes that everyone around him is out to get him, and he is able to basically fill his ears with cotton from the chair he's been strapped to. And once Rose's brother frees him from the chair to take him down to the surgery to be lobotomized, he is able to knock him out. He is able to also X the father and then also X the brother. He's able to X Rose's mother. Just basically, fighting everyone on his way out the door because everyone is trying to keep him here. He's then able to get to a car, and hearing him get in the car and run over the grandmother in the black woman's body that we've seen all throughout the movie, that is what alerts Rose, and Rose basically comes out of the house with a shotgun and goes after Chris for Xing her entire family, setting the house on fire, and a little kersnuffle happens, and we end up with the grandfather, the real black man who is the owner of the body. He ends up pew-pewing Rose in the stomach. It wasn't fatal enough for her to, pass straight on the spot, and he ends up pew-pewing himself because of the stuff that has happened to him. In the final moments of the film, Chris is kind of kneeling over Rose with his hands around her neck, and she's smiling at him, and he kind of has this moment and rethinks what he's doing and gets off of her and starts to go away when police lights start to pull up to him. And so at this point, he thinks he's been caught, when in fact, the person who had pulled up was his friend Rod, who had come to save him from the whole entire Armitage family. So in the end, you can say that, like, even though he was the hunted, he was able to muster up enough strength and save himself, versus Othello has a sad ending. Again, after solidifying that he's going to ex Desdemona, that night he goes to his bedroom and he chokes her to her passing. As you can see, both Chris and Othello go to choke out their partners, but Chris doesn't end up going through with it, and Othello does, and he does end up exing Desdemona. I was just saying that because that's another like similarity between the storylines. And after that, Rose's nurse ends up, I'm calling her a nurse, she's like helps Desdemona. They have different names, different time period, right? But she ends up coming in and finding out that Othello has ex Desdemona, and that the handkerchief that her husband Iago had her steal from Desdemona, he had in fact given to Cassio, and she's putting together that Iago is the reason that all of this is happening, and Iago ends up actually exing his wife as well. And so that's two people down. And before she gets X, she basically tells Othello that Desdemona wasn't cheating on you. She was not doing any of that. Iago was lying to you. At this point, the soldiers and the council members all come into the room, and everyone is able to find out that not only was Othello guilty of exing his wife, but that Iago is the reason that all of this is going down in the first place. And there is a point to be argued that also within this final moments of both of these stories, Rod saves Chris while Iago seals Othello's fate. He X's Othello figuratively, because in reality, Othello ends up Xing himself. And the reason he does this is, I will read this quote that I have here. It says, anticipating the inevitable verdict of the Venetian court and accepting it fully, he declares his act his responsibility for what he has done and stigmatizes himself as a criminal. And when I was giving my presentation, what I said was that Othello wasn't able to overcome the stereotypes placed on him, overcome his insecurities. He let them not only rule his life, but be one of the reasons that causes his passing, versus Chris was able to kind of overcome all of that and escape with his life. And I will also read the quote I have here to highlight Chris, and it says, rather than becoming another victim of police brutality or medical experimentation, Chris becomes the hero, seizing white villains and putting an end to the abducting and lobotomizing of black bodies. Now, I will be putting a citation, like a kind of like a works cited page, to all of the sources that I'm quoting here, just in case you want to read them. But yeah, that is the end of my presentation, and I just think it's very interesting that these two stories kind of end the way that they do. And I will in fact say, you can also argue that the reason that Chris's story ends the way it does is because of Othello. Othello came out hundreds of years before Get Out came out, and it is well known Othello's fate, being a black man who, as how I will describe it, who wasn't able to overcome all the stereotypes and stigmatisms placed on him. And so, because of the climate of the time that Get Out was coming out, Jordan Peele made the executive decision to not have it where basically Chris succumbs to the same fate as Othello. Because if Othello hadn't X'd himself, he would have been going to prison. And Chris, like I said, Jordan Peele made it so that Chris was able to make it out. But if you have the film, and I think you go to the deleted scenes or extras, there is an actual alternative scene where you get to see Chris being caught and jailed for Xing Rose. There's so many different directions you can go with this. And so I decided to just kind of basically go on the aspect of how similar the plots of these two stories are. So yeah, I know this video is a bit different than my normal content. I know we got into a few serious topics, but I hope you enjoyed. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more of me. I do post every Wednesday when I'm on a normal schedule. Again, I'm sorry that my videos have been a bit more staggered. So thank you for bearing with me with the staggered content. Again, I hope you have a good weekend, weekday, weeknight, and bye!